What's going on, guys? So in today's video, Denis Ivanov is going to create a portfolio website from the ground up, and he's going to deploy to AWS. Now, this is kind of a long project, but I would suggest following along. It's for all skill levels. He's going to use CSS Grid. He's going to implement a JavaScript theme switcher. So it's a really cool project, and definitely check out his channel. It's called Denis Ivy, and he does a ton of stuff with Python Django. So if you're into the Django framework, definitely subscribe to his channel. He also does a lot of JavaScript, and he has a lot of like helpful advice videos that are really informative. So definitely check them out. Links in the description, and I think you'll really enjoy this project. So let's get started.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Denis Ivanov, and today I'm taking over Brad's channel to build this portfolio website with you guys and also show you how we can host it publicly on an AWS S3 bucket. So what I'm going to do really quick is just recap the project itself, talk a little bit about how the video is going to go, some of the technologies we're going to use, and then we'll get right into coding it. So the idea behind this website was to build a portfolio for myself to just display some of my work, showcase some of my articles, any past projects, and just build a platform for somebody to be able to come in and get to know me a little bit better. So I figured it'd be really fun to document this and show you guys how you can build a portfolio website. And if you guys actually want to use this exact website, that's okay, go ahead and use it. But I'm also going to provide the source code for you guys to actually use. So let's talk about the components here. So in here, I have my introduction, my navigation bar right here. So this is supposed to look like a Safari browser. And in here, I can actually change the theme and allow a user to customize how they see the website. So the cool thing about this is we are going to use a little bit of JavaScript to actually save the theme settings. So if I want to go to the green theme right here, I can refresh this, and this information will actually be saved in the browser. So that's something we'll do towards the end of the video, but I think it's a fun little feature. So I also have my introduction right here, my About Me section where I'm going to link up my resume, talk about some of my skills, and link up my social accounts. Now the next section is probably the most important part of a portfolio website. So from here, I'm actually going to show some of my past work and write articles from, but this is where you really get a chance to show a potential employer what you know how to do, some of your past projects, what you've worked on, and get to know you a lot better. So this is a cool section that we're actually going to link out to other pages and allow you to write more descriptions here. So that's going to be the portfolio section. And then the last section is going to be the contact form. So I'm going to leave this up to you, whether you want to use a plugin or a different backend. But I'm actually going to use Django in my own channel and finish up this entire website with a full backend. So I'm going to leave that up to you. If you want to see how I do it from Django, go ahead and check that video out. But we're just going to build out the template and style it. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the technologies and how this thing's going to be built. This is going to be a static website. We're just going to use HTML, CSS, a little bit of JavaScript for that theme setting effect, and then Flexbox and CSS grids for the layout. So if you're not familiar with those, I'm going to spend the next 3 minutes just doing a quick recap. I want to go over this infographic that my wife made, and then we're going to get right into it. So I'm going to explain as much as I can in the code, so you should still be able to follow along if you're completely new to this, but I do want to try to give you some examples. So if you look to the left right here, this is actually going to be in the source code, so you can download this demo right here. On the left side, we have a Flexbox. Now what this is a way to create two-dimensional layouts, and we can create columns or rows. So the way we do that is we create a wrapper around these three divs right here. So we have three inner elements, and to that wrapper, we set the value of display to flex. So by default, to inline the elements, you do flex direction row, and I think that's already set to row by default, so you actually don't need to use that. But if you want to create them as columns like this, you would just set this value to column. So flex direction column. Now CSS grids give us a lot more control over our elements and help us create three-dimensional layouts. So we can create columns and rows and have a lot more control over these actual items. So if you look at this, we do the same thing. We create a wrapper around our elements. We have 7 boxes inside. And instead of display flex, we just do display grid. And this gives us a grid area. Now we can create the columns and the height and width in different ways, but I'm going to set the grid template columns value, and I'm going to create 3 columns right here. So when you create these spaces right here, we create a single column by adding that value, and then if we add a space and then add another value, that's just going to create another column for us. Now I'm using FR, and that stands for a fraction. So right now we have 3 columns, and they're all going to take up 1 fraction of that element. And that's going to give us this area taking up 1/3 for each column. Now, if we have more than 3, they're just going to stack, and then they're always going to have that value. Now, that's a quick example right there. It's a pretty simple one. The one that we're really going to work with here, we're going to use both of these, but we're going to use grid template areas to create some more advanced layouts. There's different ways of doing this, but in this case, we're going to turn this wrapper with these 3 elements into this layout right here. So what we need to do here is we put a class on these elements. And the first thing we need to do to use grid template areas is to create an actual element inside. So we take these values and we create, we use the grid area property. Now, once we have that, we can create this and make this any name we want. So I just called mine navigation. For the left column, I just kept it the same as the class. We create the grid areas, and then we can use the grid template areas value to actually position where those elements are going to be within our layout. So we have 2 columns right here. We set a height with grid template rows, and then we created a gap to create some spacing. So that's not going to be a full description. There's a lot of tutorials on this, a lot of documentation, but once we start building this, I'll explain more. But that's the idea of grid template areas, to create more complex layouts. Now, in the last section right here in this infographic, I just want to talk about positioning elements here. So for this, we have justify content and align content. Now, justify content allows us to position elements for the flexbox and CSS grids from left to right. So on the horizontal axis here, on the x-axis, and by default, all your elements are going to get stacked to the left side, just like this right here. So if we want to center those items, we're just going to center them like this. So that's going to get all those elements and crunch that inside. And then if we want to get all those elements and put them to the right, we're going to use end. And then for the flexbox, we're going to use flex end. So they both have that property, just have to specify that a little bit differently. Now, to actually align items on the y-axis, so horizontally, by default, again, they always start at the top. But in order to actually center these items, we just use align content, center, and that'll put all our elements in the center of that area. So to put them at the bottom, you just use flex end for flexbox and then end for the grid. Okay, so I'm gonna switch my color scheme to white because that's gonna be the first one we're gonna work with. And in my desktop, I just created a folder and I called that my website. So there's nothing in it and it's just this blank folder. And I did open it up in my text editor. So within my text editor, there's nothing there. So the first thing we're gonna do is create a few files and then we're gonna start adding to those. So the first file we wanna create inside of my website is gonna be called index.html. And make sure that's in that folder. And also within that folder, we wanna create default.css. And I also wanna create a folder for my images. So I'm gonna call that images. And let's go ahead and change our layout. So within view, this is Sublime Text. So within view, I can set this up. Now within index.html, I want to start creating my boilerplate HTML files. And I'm going to call this Denis Ivy. So whatever you want to call your website, make sure you add that. And the first thing I want to do is add in a meta tag for my viewport. So just some default stuff here. And I want to link up my CSS files. So because we're in the same directory, I'm just going to do default.css, and now we're connected to this file. So let's just save that. And I'm going to add in a little bit of HTML. So we're going to set a few things up. I'll explain along the way, and then we're going to start styling it. So for each section, I'm going to use a section tag, and I'm also going to create a div for my container. So let's just add in some text and I'll explain what's going on. So for the greeting message, I'm going to use an h1 tag. And for the actual value, can't figure out how to get that working. Sorry about that. Okay, so for the greeting, I'm just going to use, hi, I'm Denis Ivanov. So go ahead and write your name in there. And then I'm also going to add in a paragraph tag so we can see how things are changing, and a link. So let's just say this is a sentence. And we're also adding a link with an href. So do href, and we're going to point that just to the pound symbol, and we'll just call it link. Okay, so now that we have that, I can open up the page. So let's go to that folder, open up, what do I call it? Index. Looks like I called it index.html. I thought I called it home. So now we have that. We have our h1 tag, we have our sentence, and we have our link. So if you look at this website, things are going to be broken up into sections. So right now I have this gray background, and then it's going to alternate to a white background, and it has that border right there. And then every other section is going to be a different background. So I'm going to use that section tag to create this full width, but inside of that, there's going to be a container that's going to make sure all these items are centered. And within that container is where I'm going to create that grid. So I'm going to set that up. We're going to use CSS variables. I'll cover that in a second if you're not familiar with that. And then we'll start building everything out. But I need to do some preset stuff and make sure that everything's set up. So within our CSS, let's first work with our HTML and our body tag. And I just want to make sure that there's no padding and margin. So we'll set that to 0 right there. And also for margin. And then the next thing I want to do is set up all of my tags. So I'm going to do H1 all the way through H6. And there probably is a faster way to do this, but I'm just going to do this way. And I'm also going to set that for the strong tag. So strong. And for all of these, I just want to make sure that they all have the same color. So this is where we're going to use those variables. So really quick, let's just throw in the P tag and we'll do LI and then span. I want all of these to be a different shade. So I'm first going to start with making all of these black. And then I want to make this like just a little lighter color just to make sure things are easier to see. So we're going to add in label and then input field and text area. Okay, so let's start with the variables. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a variable by using a colon right here. And to do this, we're just going to add in root. And to create a variable, we're just going to do dash dash, and I'm going to call mine main text. So this is going to be the color for all of my header tags and any bold colors that we have. So to actually add the value, I'm just going to write in black for now, and then I'm going to use a hex color for the second one. And what variables do here is it allows us to use a color repeatedly throughout the website. So let's just try red right now. Now, if I want to create, or if I want to have all of my header tags to have the color of red, all I have to do is use that variable by using var, and then I'm going to do dash dash, and we're just going to say main text. So whatever we call this variable, we can give it any name we want. That's a capital T, and we can use it like that in the actual website. So we can apply it to any value we want. Now, if I take a look at that, we should see that value here turn red. And if I wanted to apply that to the P tag, that's all we're doing is we're able to just reuse this same variable multiple times. So if we happen to change this value later, we don't have to go through the entire website and adjust that. So now if I refresh this value, we're going to see red also applied to the P tag. So we were able to set one variable and we can now reuse that through the entire CSS file. And this works for more than just colors. I know I said colors earlier, but it can work for any values that we set in CSS. So let's go ahead and change this to black. And we want to change this value to be a lighter black color. So for this, we can add another variable, and this is going to be called secondary text. And I'm going to capitalize that T, make sure that's spelt right. And for this, I'm just going to paste in a hex value. So I have a few values that I want to use, and you can just go ahead and follow these. So that hex value, I'm going to paste that in right there. And then I'm going to change these values to that secondary text. So let's add a few more for the main website. And I'm going to use a main color. And for this, it's going to be a light gray color. And then the secondary color is going to be just white. So 2 hyphens there, secondary. And we're going to do color, also camel case that. And for that, that's going to be a white hex. And for the main color, we're just going to use this one right here. So we have our 2 colors. And I have a border that I want to use consistently throughout the website. So I'm just going to call this border color. And for that, that's going to be C1, C1, C1. And there we go. So we have our values and we want to section these values off. So I want to create these sections, and we'll throw in some dummy text for now, but we're going to create our about section, which will have the white background, the portfolio section with the gray background, and then back to white. So for this, I'm going to give it a class of S1. So that's like section style 1. And then I'm going to give that div, the container, the same class of main dash container. And the reason why I'm calling this main container is that this is a Bootstrap class, and if you want to use Bootstrap for any reason on this website, just want to make sure that you don't have any conflicts here. So let's take this value and we'll just finish this up like this. Just repeat that, and let's just write about. So just so we know that's the about section. Now for this, we're going to use a section style 2, and I'm going to repeat this, but we're still going to use the main container. So that's going to be reused consistently. We're going to change this to S1, so that's going to be the dark color again, and this is going to be the portfolio. So we have that, and then the last section is going to be the contact section, which is going to have S2. So S1, S2, S1, and S2. So contact, and now we want to set the styling to them. So we have the values. If we refresh it, we can see those. We'll see those just laid out like this. Let's actually set those background colors. So for that, I'm going to go down here and we're going to set the S1 value. So for S1, I want to set the background color, and this is going to be the main color. So we're going to use this variable right here. And to use that, again, we're going to use var dash dash, and then the name of that variable, and the border, we're going to set that to just the bottom. So border bottom, and we're going to reuse the same border for all of those. So I'm going to use that border color. And let's repeat this and change up one value for the S2. So for S2, we're going to take that, make that 2, and we're going to use the secondary color for the background color. So if I go back to the website, there we go. So we're seeing something. It looks like a few things are off. I don't see a border right now. So let's make sure that that border is properly working. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, it looks like I forgot to do 1px. So we're going to set the size of the border and then the type. So that's going to be solid. And then we set the color. So I'm just going to grab that value and we're going to paste that in. And I also want to make sure that we don't have this overflow right here. So the reason why we still have that white space is because of the line height or margin to the H1 tag. So let's fix that. And to do that, I'm just going to throw in overflow, and I'm going to set that to auto. So we're going to do that for both of these values, and then things will look a little bit better. So let's refresh it. And there we go. So those are our sections. The next thing I want to do is create that container. So I want to make sure that these items are properly centered. And the method I'm going to use for this is kind of an old school method. I'm sure there's a lot more we can do with CSS grids for this, but I'm just going to do main-container. And we're going to set the width to 1200 pixels, and I am going to just make that responsive in a second. So we're going to set that to 1200, and I'm also going to do margin 0 auto just to make sure that centers it. So margin 0 auto, create some space here, and let's just give that a test. So now my items are centered, and when I make that mobile, or when I actually change the screen size, I want to make sure that also adjusts. So to do that, we're going to add in a media query. And we're just going to write that down here. So just underneath our main CSS, I'm going to do @media screen, and then we're going to do max width 1200 pixels. And we're going to set the value to the main container. We're just going to set that to 95%. So I still want some space. So let's just indent that. And I don't know why it's doing that. So we're going to set width to 95%. And it's already centered, so we won't have to adjust that. So now when we change the screen size, we shouldn't have any issues with that. So now we have the size, and then it kind of crushes that down and it looks mobile responsive. So we have that taken care of. And the last thing I want to do is add in some more pre-built CSS, and then I want to use Google Font to actually change these values. So for the CSS, or for the size of the text, I'm going to add in some sizes here that are already pre-coded. So I'm just going to go from H1 through H6, and we're going to set all the H1 tags to 56 pixels and then slowly decrease that size. And then for all of my links right here, I want to make sure that they don't have that underline. So not text align, but text decoration. We're going to set that to none. And I also want to give them a color. So for this, I already have a hex color. We're going to set this to a light blue. So color, and paste in that hex color. And then I also want to make sure that any list that we have, because we are going to use that for our navigation, that we don't have those bullets. So I'm going to say list style, and we're just going to set that to none. So let's go ahead and refresh that. And there we go. So that looks good. Our font size matches up. Our links look good. And now I actually want to change the font style. So I'm just going to look up some Google fonts, and I have 2 that I want to work with. So go ahead and do a search. Use this URL right here. So fonts.google.com. And I'm going to find the first one for my header tag. So this is going to be Russo. And we're going to take this one. And to actually use this font, if you haven't done this before, we're just going to do select style. We're going to use embedded. And we need to add this link. And then we actually need to set the font family. So let's go back to our header tag. And I'm going to put this just above my CSS. We're going to paste that in and actually set the value. So take font family. We're going to put that in here and set that for all the larger text. So the font size, and let's see if that's applying. So now if I refresh it, there we go. So we set this one. And for the next font, let's go back. And this is going to be Roboto. So we want the Roboto font, and we also want to make sure that it's a 500 in font weight. So let's look that up. And we're going to use Roboto Mono. And let's actually select the style. Let's use the 500 one, and it's this guy right here. So we just need to paste this in, and then we also need to change that font too. So let's throw that underneath our main font for the header tags, and let's grab the actual value. So this is going to be Roboto monospace right there, and we can paste that in for this section right here. So once we have that, that should be our fonts, and we should be able to move on to the next section. So there we go. So I think that adjusted it. If it doesn't, I'll fix it later, but this is set. These don't have a value because they're just text in there. We don't have a paragraph tag or anything like that, but now let's move on to this section here. So we want to start creating our first grid area and actually center our header and just position everything where it needs to be. And it actually looks like this is a little bit thinner than what I have right now. So I want to change the font weight to all my header tags. And I'm going to do that by just adding font-weight right here. And I'm going to do 500. So let's see how that looks. And if I refresh that, okay, that looks a little bit better. So the next thing I want to do is center this right now. So I want to center it vertically and horizontally. So what I'm going to do is actually create a wrapper around this. Now it's probably pretty easy. I probably could just do text align center and add some margin or padding. But I want to start showing you how we can work with that grid. So we're actually going to create a grid area. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than it needs to be. And then I'm going to show you how to center that, and then we'll just clean it up. So let's go into this section right here, and let's take out our link and our paragraph tag. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a wrapper around that intro. So let's close off the div and fix that indentation. And I'm going to give this a class of greeting wrapper. It's a greeting dash wrapper. And let's take this greeting wrapper and start working with the styling here. So I'm going to copy this. And just underneath my main container and above that media query, let's paste that in. And to create the grid area, we're going to do display grid. So this now makes that area a grid area. And I'm going to create a border so we can see it. So border, we're going to do 2px dashed, and I want to set that to light coral. So it'll be a light red color. And let's set the height. So I'm going to set the height the old school way. So we're just going to say min dash height, and let's just do 10 EM. So that should be a big border around that, or a tall height, and then we can show that centering. So let's actually do a little bit more. I'm going to do, let's set that to 20 EM. That should look a little bit better. I just want to make sure that you can see that vertical alignment. So the first thing I want to do is center that horizontally. So in order to do that, and again, we're still going to use text align center, but I just want to start showing you how this works. So once we have that grid, we can do justify content, and I'm going to do center. So if you take a look at that, it's going to center it right in the middle. And then I want to have this aligned with right in the middle in the box vertically too. So if I go back here, all we're going to have to do is align. We could do align items, but right now I'm going to work with align content, and I won't explain what the other one is, but there's a lot of documentation on that. So align content, and let's just do center for this. And now if I refresh it, there we go. So we're aligned on the X and Y axis right here. So we perfectly centered our text right here. So I'm just going to take out justify content, and we're going to do text align. So that's not going to be fully responsive. So we still want to do center like that. And I just wanted to show you that example. So let's change this height, and I want to set that to 10. So I just by default want to have some space, but I don't want it to be that tall. So that looks a little bit more like what I have here. And for now, I'm just going to leave this border, and let's go on to this next section. So I'm going to create a container around this, and then 3 columns in here, and we'll start adjusting those. So just underneath my greeting wrapper, we're going to create another grid area. So I'm going to call this navigation wrapper here. So actually, it's going to be called intro wrapper. So we're going to use a class here, and I'm going to say intro wrapper. And within my intro wrapper, we're going to create 3 divs right here. So the first one's going to be the navigation. So I'm going to say nav right there, and I'm going to give that a class of nav wrapper. So nav dash wrapper. And I'm going to copy and paste this 2 more times. So we're going to have, I probably should have better naming, but I'm going to leave it like this. We should have left column right here. So left dash column. And let's change that name right here. So I'm just going to grab that, paste it in here. And this one's going to be right column. And we'll also set that here. So right dash column. And if I save that, let's actually add some borders around this really quick. So let's go to my CSS right now. And for the intro wrapper, actually, let's take a look. Let's just make sure that we have it. So here we go. We have our items. And the first thing I'm going to do is set that container. So for the container, we're going to take intro wrapper right here. And I'm going to set the background. For now, we're just going to actually start setting the real values. And then I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to use these dashed lines right here to actually show you this layout. So we're going to set background color. We want this white, so we're going to use that variable. And that's going to be the secondary color. So this variable right here, just FFF, that's the hex for white. And we want to set the border. So for the border, I'm going to do, actually, let's start writing that out. So border 1px, and we're going to create that to be solid. And we're also going to use a variable for the border color. So we have a variable called border color up there, and that's going to set that value. Now for the box shadow, what I normally do is I just use a CSS shadow generator. So shadow generator right here, and I'll just show you how this works if you haven't seen this. So I usually use a website like this, and I start creating the shadow so you can adjust it. You can see that shadow right here, change the blur, adjust these things right here, and I take this code. So I already have some, but I would recommend checking that out if you want to create your own, and unless you know how to code that up, that's probably better, but for now, I'm just going to use that. So I'm going to paste in my shadow into the intro wrapper, and let's see what we have. Okay, so there's my wrapper. Now let's start creating that layout. So I'm going to get these three classes right here. So I'm going to take nav wrapper, left column, and right column, and we're going to add a border to that. So nav dash wrapper, and I'm going to set border to 1px. Let's just do dashed, and let's do light coral again, and let's repeat this 3 times. And I just want to change these values right here. So I'm going to change this to left column right here, and then we're going to set the next one to right column. So looks like I excluded that L right there. And let's take right, paste that in here. And right now you're just going to see 3 rows right now. So it's not going to do much. We just have these wrappers around them. And the next thing I want to do is actually start working with that grid area. So just for the purpose of keeping things in order, I'm going to start creating the grid area down here. So we're going to do display grid. So that whole area now, the intro wrapper is a grid area. And the first thing I want to do is do grid template columns. So what I'm going to do is set the columns and the amount and the size for that grid area. So we're going to set the first column 1 FR. If I leave it, the whole grid area will stay the same. It's just going to have it to 1 column taking up 1 fraction. To add another column, I'm going to do 1 FR. So this should give me 2 columns, both taking up 1 fraction. So we should have columns taking up 2 sides of it. So right now what's happening, if I zoom in a little bit, we have our nav right here because it's on top, it aligns it to the left. Our left column goes to this section, and then that right column takes up this bottom area, taking up the entire fraction, I believe. So what I want to do is actually create the layout. So for this, what I need to start working with is grid template areas. So grid template areas. So we're going to start creating this, but before I do anything, we need to put some identifiers on these classes right here. So in the CSS, I first need to identify the grid area. So right here, I'm going to do grid dash area, and I need to give this grid area a name, and I can call it anything I want. It doesn't have to be nav wrapper, but I'm just going to repeat this, and I'm just going to keep this consistent. But again, this can be whatever you want it. So we're going to take this nav wrapper or this grid area, and I'm going to repeat the same thing. So grid area, and this is going to be for my left column right here. And I also want to do that for the right column. So grid dash area and right column. Okay, so we have our 3 grid areas identified: nav wrapper, left column, and right column. Now within grid template areas, we can actually start using it because we set this value. So in here, I'm going to create some space, and I'm going to create a string. So when we create a new string, we're going to create a new row, and I'm going to call this nav wrapper. Now this is saying for this first column, we have this first column, go ahead and add that nav wrapper area in there. Now if we want to span that grid across both of these columns, so remember we're trying to make this navigation bar go all the way across, all we need to do is create a space, and we just need to repeat nav wrapper. So it's going to take that grid area and it's going to span it across both of these areas. So now we can create a space. We don't need any comma or anything like that there. We just add another space for a string, and we're going to tell this grid template areas to take our left column and our right column and put them next to each other. So we're going to say left column, and I'm going to create another space, and we're going to do right column. Make sure that all spelled right. And now it's going to align everything exactly like this. So this whole area will actually look like this. We're going to have a nav wrapper, and it's going to span across like that. So if I refresh that, there we go. So my navigation goes all the way across, and my left and right column are aligned. Now, I have full control over this. This technically doesn't have to be spaced out like that. We could just have it like this, but just for visual effect, this helps a little bit. And I can move the right column over to the left side at any point and fully control that. So to set some height, I want to be able to see something here. So we're going to temporarily set height like we did before. And I'm going to do grid template rows for this. Now, rows work a lot like grid template columns. So in this case, we're going to set the top row to 3EM. So by default, it starts at the top, and then we want to set the next row. So if we create a space, just like we did with our columns, we're going to go down to the second row. So it's going to set this row right here to 3EM in height, and then we're going to set this next one to 30EM in height. So let's just do 30 instead of 20, and we'll create that space. So we have our columns, rows, and just to see that a little bit better, there we go. So now we have our full layout, we have our row, our two sides, and things look a little bit better. So that's kind of the idea of grid template areas. I went over that in the demo, but I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Now it's time to actually style this navigation. So what we need to do is add a background to this, and I realized I left out this border radius, but we need to create the background, these three buttons right here, and a navigation. So this is going to be UL tag right here. So it's just going to be a list that we're going to inline, and we're going to create a div with 3 little divs inside of it, and then just inline those. So at this point, we don't need CSS grids. It's a simple layout. So we're just going to use Flexbox for this. So we're just going to create a 2-column layout, inline it, and we'll style it. So let's go to this section, and I want to create a border radius for that intro wrapper. So before we do that, let's first remove all of these dashed borders. So we're going to take that from navigation, from left column, right column, and our greeting wrapper. So where was that? Looks like we had it up here. So the dashed border. Now if I save that, I just want to make sure I can remove everything. And there we go. And I also had a misspell actually, just caught that with the right column. So that's why that border wasn't showing. So now we can go back up to this intro wrapper, and I'm going to create a border radius, and not border color. So border radius. And for this, what we need is this border to, it has to have that edge right there at the 2 corners, so on the top left and top right, but on the bottom, we don't want a border radius. And we also want to be able to reuse this later in other pages where it sits outside of this, but just on top of this, on top of the website. So let's actually set that up. And for the border radius, we're just going to do 5px, 5px, and then 0 and 0. So that should set it. And I need to change that to a P right there. And that should give us the effect that we're looking for. So we have our shadow, we have the border radius, and let's just refresh that. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. And I also want a border bottom for this. So let's actually set that for the navigation. So for the nav bar, we're just going to do border dash bottom. And this is going to be 1px solid, and we're just going to do that variable. We're going to use that variable for the border color. So dash dash border color, and let's see what we have. So once we have that border, what I'm going to do is create 2 sections right here. So right now I'm just going to wrap it in a div, but I want to show you how we can inline. So we have this side go to the left and this side go to the right. So we're going to use Flexbox for that. And before we do this, I'm going to wrap that in a div. So let's go into that navigation, and we're just going to put that text in that div. So div, and let's close that out. And I'm just going to paste it underneath, and I also want to duplicate it. So let's remove that top part. So we have one side here. I'm going to call this, we're going to give it a class, and this is going to be dots dash wrapper. And once I duplicate it, I'm going to change this next value to an ID. So this is going to be ID, and we're going to call this navigation. And for now, it's going to be a div, but we're later on going to turn it into a UL tag for our nav bar for the actual links there, and it's just going to be an inline list. So once we have these two, when we refresh it, so by default, they're going to stack on top of each other. But if we make this into a flex box, so the first value we can set here, pull up the right one here. So the first thing we need to do before we actually start aligning everything is we need to go to our nav wrapper, so the item that's containing those elements. And in here, instead of display grid, we're going to do display flex here. So let me fix the spacing. So we have display flexed, and right away it's going to inline it at the very start. So they're just going to stack up in line, and it's just going to start at the left and go to the right. Now, I want to pull up an article here that really helped me a lot. So this is from CSS Tricks. Here's a link to the actual article, and I'll see if I can paste this in the description. But in this article, this is where it talks about all the properties and all the values to justify content, align items, and so on. And the ones I talked about earlier in the beginning were flex, start, end, and center. So in this case, I want to do space between. So what it's going to do is it's going to grab my first element, place it to the left, and then place the next one as far away as possible. So if we have more items, it's going to try to just create as much space as possible in between them. So this is what we want, and it'll give us this effect where I'll align one side and the other side to the very right instead of inlining them how we have it. So the second we display it as flex, I'm just going to do justify content, and that value is going to be space between. So this is why I wanted to add that text. I wanted to show you that demo. So one nav is going to be right here and the next one right here. So the next thing I want to do with the flex box is make sure that these are centered. So if you notice, I don't want space on the top and bottom here. So to center those, instead of align content, it's all in this article, so I recommend you check that out. I'm just going to use align items, and that's going to center it vertically for us. So this is just going to be center, and it should fix that space that we have in between everything else. So there we go. So now it's centered. And the next thing I want to do really quick is create those dots and then that navigation. So let's go into this dots wrapper, and I'm actually quickly going to change this to a UL tag. So just while we're here, I'm going to change that to a UL, and we'll add in the links later. So for the dots wrapper, what I'm going to do is create 3 divs right now, and then I'm just going to repeat them, but I'm going to give them all the class of dot and then, or browser dash dot. So browser dot, and then I'm going to give it an ID. So each dot is going to have the same class, but it's going to have a different ID so we can change the actual colors. So this is going to be dot 1, and then I'm going to paste this in 3 times. Let's create the space so we can see what's going on. And this is going to be dot 2, 3, and then we're going to style this. So let's actually go to the dots, let's style them, and then we're actually going to create this to be a flex box within a flex box. So we actually want to inline those dots, and you'll see what I mean in a second here. So just underneath my nav wrapper, let's go to the dots wrapper, and let's use this class right now. So we're going to set the dots wrapper class, but I'm not going to actually apply anything to it. We're going to start with browser dash dot. And the first thing we want to do is set the height, width, and border radius and a background color. So the background color, this is going to be black just to start. So by default, if we don't have a color, it's just going to be black just so we can see it. And then the height is going to be 15 pixels. Make sure that that's correct. And the width will also be 15 pixels. So 15 and 15. And then border radius, we're going to set to 50%. So I want to make sure that's a full circle. So that's going to be 50% to create that. And then the last thing we need is a shadow. So again, I use the shadow generator, but I'm just going to paste in my built-in shadows. So this is something that I already created earlier and didn't want to paste that in. So now if I save this, so we apply that to the class, to browser dot, let me make sure that I spelled that right. So we have browser dot, and they're just going to line up just one by one like that. So I actually want to create some space between them, and then let's inline them. So we're going to go back just underneath our border radius, we're going to create a margin here. So I'm going to set that to 5 pixels, and let's see what we have. Okay, so what did I do wrong here? Not 50, we need 5. So now to inline them, we're just going to go to that wrapper, so dots wrapper, and I'm first going to set this to display flex. And actually, I think that's all I needed for that. So outside of display flex, so remember by default, it's just going to inline them at the start. And I just want a padding to create some separation here. So we have padding from that left side right there. So now that I have that, everything's inlined. Now I just need to style these individual colors. So we have that with the ID. So I have the ID set to each one, and we're just going to go through dot 1 through dot 2, and we're just going to start applying those, and we'll change the color. So for the first one, I'm just going to paste this value in. That's going to be the red color. I believe. So yeah, red, yellow, and green. So I already have those pre-built. So we're just going to take this element, repeat that twice, and change the values, and then change the actual hex color for that. So this is going to be the yellow, and then green right here. So now if I save it, refresh, there we go. So now it's starting to look like our nav bar. I also want to apply a background to that. So let's set that. And that's going to be the background for the nav wrapper. And background color is going to be that variable. And I think that was our secondary or our main color that we wanted to set. So let's see if that was the right one. So that's supposed to be that dark gray. So I want to separate it from this main container. And there we go. So I also want a border radius. So it looks like it's kind of going outside of it because the actual intro section has a border radius, but the nav wrapper doesn't. So let's set that. Let's take it from intro wrapper and just apply the same border. Okay, there we go. So now let's go to this navigation, inline it, and actually set those colors. So for this, all I want to do is create three LI, or not three, but just one LI tag, but I'm going to create links inside here, and we'll make sure that it's actually inlined by adding another link. So if you want another one, I just want to make sure that you don't get any issues later. So for now, let's just send it nowhere, and let's say contact, and let's repeat it 3 times. So I'm going to paste that in. Okay, so right now, our link should be styled. So we pre-built that right there in the beginning. And I just want to make sure that that's in line. So I need to get the code for our actual navigation. So for the navigation, that's a UL right now. So let's go just underneath our nav wrapper and let's say navigation. And it's also an ID, so we're going to use that instead of a class. And for this, the first thing I want to do is set the margin to 0 and then some padding. So I want to make sure that it's separate and not touching the side there to the very right, and set a padding of 10 pixels. Let's confirm that we're seeing that. So there we go. We added some space there, and let's actually inline it. So we're going to take this navigation ID right here, and I want to repeat this. So we're going to do LI, and for this, we're going to set it to display inline block. So that'll inline the elements, and then I want to make sure that there's actually space between each link. So margin right, and that's going to be set to 5 pixels, not 50. Keep making that mistake. And then margin left right now is going to be set to 5 pixels also. Okay, so that looks good. So I'm going to remove this link, but now we know they're inlined. And as we make the screen smaller, it's adjusting to it. So we don't have that many links right now, so I don't need to do anything special with this. I'm going to keep it simple like that. So I'm just going to remove this next one, and let's go on to the next section. Save that, refresh it, and there we go. So for this next section, I need to add in an image, and I'm just going to add in some HTML, and then we're going to style this. So let's go back to, I'm going to go back to my desktop here. So if you have any pictures, go ahead and add them to your website, or you could just use mine from the source code. But I'm going to go to my desktop, grab these images, and add them to my images folder. So now if I look in my text editor, I should be able to see these, and they're in the images folder. And the one I'm going to work with is Denis.jpg. So if I go down to my left column here, I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and I'm going to add in an image tag. So to add in the image, we're just going to do images. So we're going into that folder, and then I'm going to paste in the image that I want. So we'll just write it in, Denis.jpg. And I'm going to give this the ID of profile pic. So this is just going to be profile_pic. Okay, so now that we have that, the next thing we need is going to be this note right here. So we just want to say personalized theme, and then we're going to add in those dots. So let's go ahead and do that. And this next section, this is going to be an H5 tag, and I'm going to say personalize theme. Make sure that I spell that right. And underneath this, I just want to make sure I spelled that, or spelled personalized right. I'm second guessing myself. So just underneath this, I'm actually going to style this inline. So we're not going to reuse this anywhere. So I'm going to just do text-align. We're going to center that. And I want to make sure the line height is set to 0. I don't want any space. So let's just do line height 0. And I'm going to create that wrapper. So for this wrapper, we're going to create 3 dots within it. And then we're actually going to use Flexbox to style that. So let's first create a div, and I'm going to call this, I'm going to give it a class of theme options wrapper, and I'm actually going to change that to an ID in a second. So theme options wrapper, and let's set that to an ID. And inside, I'm going to create 3 empty divs. So this is going to be just like that top navigation section. So we're going to create these dots and then style them. So just like this, we're going to put them in that wrapper and inline them and then center them. So for these, they're all going to have a class of theme dot or theme dash dot. And I also want to make sure that they all have a custom ID. So they're going to share a custom styling or a unique styling with all of them. But then for the actual color, I want to make sure that they all have their own. So the first one's going to be light mode, so light dash mode. And then I'm going to copy and paste this 3 more times. And I'm going to set this next one to blue mode, and then green and purple. Okay, so we have purple mode there. And then just underneath that, all still within the left column, I'm going to add in a paragraph tag. And I'm just going to paste in the sentence here. So we're just going to say theme options will be saved for your next visit. And I want to make sure that there's a break tag there so the text just aligns a little bit better. So for that text, I'm going to add an ID of settings dash note, and that way I can just style that. And now if I refresh this, save it and refresh it, so we're going to have our image, our note, and our text there. So the first thing is I want to remove the height from this row. I just want that to auto adjust to the content inside, and then I'm going to start adjusting this image. So we have the ID of profile pic, make sure that's right, and that's a misspell right there. And let's go back to my CSS. So I'm going to go to this section. I'm just going to take out grid template rows. I just want to, again, auto adjust to the size of it. There we go. So now that doesn't break it. And for that picture, we're just going to set that as a height and width of 200 pixels, and then we're going to center that. So I'm going to go down to left column here and start setting up profile pic. So profile underscore pic, and set the height and width. So the height's going to be 200 pixels, and the width is going to be 200. And for the actual size of the image, if your image is a different size, just to make sure that it doesn't expand over it or start messing with the image, let's just do object fit right there, and we're going to set the value to cover. So that's just going to make sure that no matter what the size of the image is, that it's not going to distort it. It's just going to try to position it in it and crop where it needs to. So we're going to set object fit, and the rest for the actual profile picture, we want to make sure we have a border. So we're going to set that to 2 pixels. We're going to make that solid, and we're going to use that variable again of that border color. So we're going to set border dash color, and I think that's it for the image. We have, we also need to center that actually. So I'm just going to start that up here. We're going to display block just to give us more control over this. And then we're going to center this the old school way. We're just going to do margin 0 and then auto. So that's going to center my image. And now I want to create those dots underneath. So let's start with actually styling the individual dots, and then we'll start putting them in line. So those are going to be in a flex box, and we're going to start with theme dot right here. At first, they're all going to have the same styling, and then we're going to use the ID to actually give the colors. So just underneath profile pic right here, let's go ahead and set the height and width to 30 pixels. I think that's what I had it. So yeah, we have 30 pixels for the height, 30 for the width, and then I want to set the border radius. So I want to make sure those are round. Border dash radius 50%. And after the border radius, I'm going to add in a shadow. So I've been doing this a lot. I'm using the same shadow here from that shadow generator. We're going to paste that in. And I also want to add in a hover effect. So whenever the cursor goes over these, I want to make sure that it turns into a pointer. And let's actually test that right now. So if I save that, those look a little funny right now. So those are just white right now, and looks like the width did not set there. So let's see what's going on here. Oh, that needs to be 30 pixels. And by default, I want to set the background color to black so we can actually see that. Let's try that one more time. Okay, so there we go. And we have that cursor pointer. So I'm going to add some margin, and let's add the border. So I'll explain what the border is going to look like in a second. So margin is going to be 5 pixels. And for the border, what I'm trying to do here, okay, that margin works. So right now, that border is going to be this dark color, and you see that around all of these. But when we switch that theme, we need to change that to white. So this is why I'm going to be using a variable for this, so we can actually change that value much easier. So at the top here, within my variable, I'm going to create a variable called theme.border. So we're just going to do -- theme dot border. And I'm going to paste in the hex color. So this is just going to be a dark color for now. And then we can go back to our profile picture or this section right here. So to theme dot, we're going to do border. We're going to set that to 2 pixels. And then that's going to be solid. And we can use that new variable. So we're going to throw that in. And for the wrapper, I want to make sure that these are inlined. So we're going to take theme options wrapper. So those are all inside of this div right here. And I can display that as flex right here. So that's an ID. We're just going to do display flex, and that's going to inline them automatically. And I also want to use, let's see what else I want to do with the flex here. So I think I want to center that. So let's go ahead and look at the demo. Yeah, so I'm just going to do justify content and center. So that way we don't have to worry about the outer wrapper to that. So justify content, center, and now if I take a look at that, it should look a little bit like this, or at least to what we have right now. So let's set the colors and then we'll style this section. And I want to add in some space at the top and bottom. So for the individual elements right here, I'm going to paste in some code here. So I'm going to start with the light mode. So just underneath this theme dot. And we actually want to add a hover effect. So I'm going to do theme dot, and then on hover, I just want to expand the border width. So I want to make it obvious that we're hovered over it. And this border width is going to be set to 5 pixels. So right now it's at 2. We're going to change that to 5, and that's it for now. So now let's actually set these colors. So we're going to start with light mode, and we're going to use these IDs. So we're going to take this ID and I'm going to paste that here and set the background color. So for the first one, for light mode, it's just going to be white. So we're going to do FFF, and let's repeat that 3 more times. So 1 for blue mode, 1 for green mode, and 1 for purple mode. So let's change these values. This is going to be purple or green or blue, actually. Keep messing that up. So blue mode, for blue mode, I'm just going to paste in this hex color. I'm going to use that one right there. And then green, we're going to use the green hex. And finally, we're going to use a purple hex for purple mode right here. So purple mode. Okay, so now that we have the colors here, we have the hover effect. I just want to center this item right here and actually change the size of the font. So I want to have more control over that. So we're just going to use that ID for the settings note. And we're going to set the font size to 12 pixels. And for the font style, I'm going to make that italic. So font style, italic, and let's center that. So let's just do text-align and center. And let's just see what we have so far, make sure it's all working. So now that the colors look good, we have that hover effect, which we'll actually add in a transition later. But for the padding right here, let's actually go old school and add some spacing. So let's just add that to my column. So in the column here, I'm just going to add in padding top and bottom. And we'll have to do that with the right side too. So padding dash top, that's going to be 50 pixels. And for padding bottom, we're going to do the same. Okay, so that's 50 pixels. And I think that's it for this section. So we added all those. Now in the next section, what I want to do is start working with this right side. So I'm going to build out this box right here, and then we're going to make sure that it's centered vertically. And I'm going to show you how to create these dots in this border along with the shadow effect. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So I'm going to start by grabbing my intro sentence, so you can write whatever you want here. And I'm going to create this wrapper around it, and we're going to create the border. So let's start with that right column here, and I'm going to create a div. And this div is going to have the ID of preview. So within the div, I'm going to add an H1 or H3 tag. And within the H3 tag, I'm just going to say what I do and make sure all those first letters are capitalized. And we're going to create the preview or the ID of preview. And just underneath this, I'm going to create a paragraph tag. So this is where I'm going to paste in my intro. Again, just write whatever you feel like you'd want to say about yourself there. And now let's start styling this. So the preview should be there now. So we just have the text, and we want to create the border and set the width, and then I'm going to start with the dots. So let's go back to the CSS. We have the preview ID. I'm going to put that just underneath right column here. So we're going to use that ID, and let's go ahead and set a width. So the width is going to be 300 pixels, and I want to create a border. So for the border, I'm going to do 1.5 pixels. So I want it just a little bit bigger than 1, but I don't quite want it to be 2 pixels. So we're going to make that solid, and the color I'm just going to paste in here. So it's going to be a light blue. So it's going to be, I think it's actually the same exact color as a link. I can't remember exactly what I used here, So we have the border, and I also want to create some padding in here, and I want to make sure that we have a position of relative. So we're going to need this for how we set the dots. So if I create the background color right now, I'm just going to go ahead and add that in. I'm going to use a variable here, and the variable I'm going to use is going to be preview and then BG. So the B is going to be capitalized, and I need to create this. So for the preview background, I'm going to paste in an RGB color. So we want it to be transparent. I actually want to see through it. So I want to be able to see the actual background here. So we're going to create this color, and then we'll do the background after. So let's go ahead and set that variable, and I'm going to paste that in. So dash dash preview BG, and this is going to be an RGB that I'm just going to paste in. So let's throw that in. So there we go. So that should set our background, and there's a few more things that I want to do here. So within my preview wrapper, I also want to add a padding of 15 pixels. And we also missed this border right here, so I want to add that. And I'm actually going to hold off on the position relative, because for those of you that don't understand positioning, I want to show you what's going to happen if we don't add it and how the dots will look. So there's our border, there's our slight shadow, and we also need to move this down. So for the two dots, what I'm going to do is actually put in 4 divs, one for each dot right here. And I'm going to put 2 of them above inside of that div and 2 of them below, and then we're going to set the positioning. And technically, I don't think it matters because of how we're actually going to set it up, but I feel like it helps to see it in the HTML. So for this, I'm going to create a div here, and this div is not going to have anything in it, but it's going to have the class of corner. So just like we've done a few times already, we're going to recreate this, and we're going to have 4 divs with the same class, and each one of these divs will have an ID. So this is going to stand for corner, and this is going to be my top left corner, so corner TL, and I'm going to repeat this 3 more times, put 1 up here and 2 below. So this one is going to be changed to corner TR. This one's going to be corner BR for bottom right, and corner BL, so for bottom left. Now, once we set these values, let's style them, and then I'm going to set the positioning. So in here, I'm going to take the corner, so I'm going to use the class here, corner, and the corner is going to be height and width of 7 pixels both ways. So we want to do that and make it a full circle. So we're also going to set the border radius to 50%. That's going to give us a circle, and we also want to actually give it a border. So let's just do border radius like that, and the border needs to be the same as the preview. So we want to make it look like it's the same element. So let's add that. So we need the sizing, and let's add a background color. So background color, we'll set that to FFF. So I want to make that white, and let's see what we have so far. So let's refresh the page, and there we go. So we have our divs, and we just want to position them this way. So right now, if I start creating the absolute positioning, it's going to put our items wherever they want on the DOM. So if I set it to top 0 and 0, so top left, it's going to put it right here, and I want that to set right here. So I'm going to use absolute positioning to put these, and I'm going to show you the issue and then how we're going to solve it. So this is for those of you that don't really understand how that works. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to create the position of absolute. And I want to start by grabbing these IDs right here. So I'm going to repeat this a couple of times. So we're going to start with top left, and we're going to set the position top to -5, and that's going to be in pixels. And then the position to the left also in -5. So that's going to be -5 pixels also. And if I repeat this a few times, our items are going to go all over the page here. So we're going to grab the top right, so TR is the next item, and then we're going to have BR, so for bottom right, and this is going to be BL for bottom left. And I also need to change the positioning. So this is going to be changed to right, so I want to go to the top right corner, and then I want to go to the bottom right corner, so this is going to be bottom, and this needs to be changed to right. So bottom right, and the next one is bottom left. So for bottom left, this just needs to be changed to bottom, and that should do it for our positioning. So I'm going to take that out right there. And now if I refresh this, we should see these items, but they're going to be somewhere far out here. So you can barely see them. So we have that negative spacing there. So that was what we set for the values, and they're trying to hide outside of the page here. So what we want now is for those to be inside here on these corners and slightly coming out like this. So to do that, all I have to do is set the positioning of the parent element to relative here. So I'm going to take positioning or position, and I'm going to change that to relative, and that's going to contain and set the absolute positioning inside of its parent. So it's going to read that value and adjust those. So now if I refresh it, there we go. That's exactly what we wanted. So let's set this center this on the vertical axis. So I'm going to go back to my right column here, and I'm going to display this as grid. Now this would work with flex too, but just because we've been using grid this whole time, I want to just stay consistent with that. So we're going to display it as grid, and remember to do this, it's just align content, and we're going to center that. So we don't need to justify content because we do want it starting on that left column. So the start is right here. And now if I refresh it, there we go. So we just need to add the shadow. Looks good so far. We're going to add the shadow, and then we're going to make this responsive. So for the shadow, all I need to do is create a parent element around this. Now there's multiple ways we can do this, but this one is a kind of a quick fix and it works. So we'll stay with that. Why overcomplicate it? And let's go ahead and wrap this. So I'm going to take this, indent everything, and for the shadow, I'm going to call this, I'm going to give it the ID of preview shadow. So let's go ahead and set that preview dash shadow. Okay, so we have the shadow, and I want to set the background color and start styling this. So let's go back to our CSS, and just above our preview, I want to set the background to this, and for this I need to set another variable. So for the background color, I'm going to use the variable of preview shadow. So let's go ahead and use that, and then I'll actually create it. So double hyphen there, preview shadow. And for preview shadow, we're going to use a variable because we also want this to adjust whenever we're changing the theme. So we're going to paste that value, and that's with a capital S right there. And the value of this is going to be a hex color that I need to paste in. So I'm just going to throw that in, and you can copy that. And we need to do a few things with that shadow. So I'm going to add a semicolon there. So for the shadow, what I'm going to do is first set a width, and I'm going to make sure that that's the same as the child element. So the same as the preview that is inside of it. So we have the width, and the height I'm going to set to 180 pixels. And this is where I'm going to create that effect that looks like it's behind it and at an angle. So it's going to be a little bit smaller. And then I also want to set a padding. And for the padding left, I'm going to set it to 30 pixels. So it's going to push its inner element out. And for the padding top, I'm going to set that also to 30 pixels. So now if I save it and refresh it, we should see this effect actually play out. So if I refresh that, there we go. So it's centered. The shadow looks good there. Now something that we need to take care of is to make sure that whenever our screen starts collapsing, that we don't overflow like this, and we can actually fix these items. So this is where grid template areas are really cool in allowing us to adjust things and change our layouts whenever something like this happens. So if we can go down to this media query right here, what I'm going to do is take this, and I'm going to change this value because I think it's about 800 pixels where this is happening. And I'm going to remove this element. So at 800 pixels, what we're going to do is we're going to take this intro wrapper. So I'm going to find the original element, and I'm going to take this entire section. So we only need to change a part of it, but I'm going to paste it in, and we're going to remove a few areas here. So the only thing we need is the grid template columns and grid template areas. So I'm going to take all of this out, and at 800 pixels, what I need to happen here is I want this to turn into a full column, and I want this to go below it. So I'm going to tell my grid template columns, whenever we reach this size, let's only have one column, and let's make that the full width, so one fraction of our entire container. And I want it to span only one column right here, and I want the right column to go below. So I'm going to create another string, and now it's going to stack exactly like this. So it creates that perfect visual representation, and it's going to adjust for that. So let's try that out. Now, if I refresh it, there we go. So now the column is stacking on top of it. It's overflowing. We're going to fix that in a second, but it's doing exactly what we wanted. Now, as we expand, it goes at about 800 pixels, and it goes back to the original size. So what I'm going to do here to fix this overflow, I'm going to use an old school method. We could use gaps and all that kind of stuff, but just to keep it simple, all I'm going to do is to the right column, which we already specified above, I'm going to set the alignment. First, I want to center this. So I want to make sure this goes into the center. So we're just going to use right column, and it's already a grid. So we already set that value above. And all we need to do now is just say justify content and center. And again, if you're new to grids, we can only say this because we already set it as a grid earlier. So now it's going to center that content, and I want to change that margin below. So to do this, I'm going to find the right column above. So we're going to use Control F, and I'm going to search for that. So here's my right column, and just like the left column, I'm going to set the padding top to make that 50 pixels, and the padding left is also going to be, or padding bottom is going to be 50 pixels. So once we finish this up, it should look good and it won't have that overflow anymore. So there we go. So that's exactly what we want now. Now for the next section, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start going a little bit faster because I kind of got the core concepts out of the way in the initial setup. So I'm going to start creating this about section, which is a really easy layout. It's just a 2-column layout. We can probably even use Flexbox for this, but I want to introduce another grid concept, and this area is going to be pretty cool too. So there's going to be 2 new concepts for the grids that we're going to apply, but everything else is just going to be styling it, and we're going to get into changing the theme, and we'll actually end up hosting this. So let's go ahead and get started with this next section. So just like all the other sections, we're going to start by creating a wrapper in this entire section. So what we're going to do is go back to the HTML here, and I'm going to make sure this code is open here. And within my main container, I need to create a wrapper that's going to be my grid area and then 2 columns within this. So the first thing is going to be this main div, and this is going to be about-wrapper. And within this wrapper, we're going to have 2 divs here. So the first one is going to be for the about section. So I'm going to call this one about me. And I don't know if I'm actually going to use this class. I don't remember if I needed to add custom styling to this or not, but just to identify it, we're going to have that right there. And I'm going to create another one. So we have our container. So let's create some space so we can see it. And we have our 2 columns. So this is going to be our social links. So I'm going to call that social-links. And we're going to use classes for this. So we're going to stick to that. And within the about section, let's start adding our HTML, and then we'll style it in a second. So I'm first going to style this left column and then the right column. So for this section, the first thing I want to do is add in an H4 tag for this. So I'm going to say more about me, and I'm going to paste in this text. So I'm going to copy and paste this. You can just use mine, use lorem ipsum, or just have your own description here. So we're going to use the H4 tag, and I'm going to just add in a bunch of content. So okay, so that's there. And for this section, I'm just going to use 2 paragraph tags, and I'll create 2 right now, and then we'll actually paste in both sections right away. So we'll take in this first part right here, and later on, I'm actually going to make this dynamic in another project, but for now, it's just going to be static like this. So that's my first part, and the second part, so we want that space right there, and the second paragraph, if I can select that. Okay, so we have the 2 paragraphs, and we want to create a break. So I'm going to do an HR tag here. So we want that line break, and we want another H4 tag. So within this H4 tag, this is where we're going to talk about our skill sets, what we understand. So I'm going to put in top expertise, and it's usually hard to list out everything here. So I'm just going to put in the honorable mentions, I guess, the things that I want to talk about or want someone to see. And then later on, you can maybe have another section where you can write these descriptions. So we'll just put this here. So I'm going to take this first part of the sentence, and then I'm actually going to add that link. So I'm actually going to add a resume here. So I'm going to show you how we can add a PDF if you don't understand that, and then how to actually open it up in a new tab and allow somebody to download that. So let's go ahead and put that paragraph tag. And right within the paragraph tag, I'm going to add in the A tag here, or I'm going to add in a link. I didn't know how to say that. And I'm just going to say download resume. So I want it to be obvious that it's downloadable, so I'm going to say that, and then I also want to make sure it's a different color. And if we go back to my desktop here, I'm going to minimize everything. Let's go ahead and grab this PDF, and we'll drag it into this website here. So I'm just going to put it right with the index.html and the default CSS here. So we should see it now right here. That's the resume. And to link that up, all we have to do is do resume.pdf here. And I just want to make sure that's lowercase to keep consistency. And one thing that's common, you don't want somebody clicking this and leaving your website. So right now, if I refresh the page right here, I'm going to save, actually wrong one here. So I'm going to save this link. And if I refresh it, if somebody clicks on this, I don't want them going to another page. I want them to actually open this up in another link. I don't want them to leave the website. So I'm going to set this to target, and then we're going to do underscore blank. So now if they click on that link, it's going to take them or open it up in another page here. So they click on it, the website's still open, and it just opens up a new tab. Then they have their resume. So now what I'm going to do is add in these skills right here. So these are going to be 2 lists right here. So I'm going to use a UL tag and LI tags. And I'm just gonna add 2 of them in here, and then we're gonna use a wrapper around to create this background, and then we're gonna create a grid out of that, and then we're gonna inline that. So that's how it's gonna set this like this to where they're in line next to each other. So let's start creating those. So what I'm gonna do here is create a wrapper for that. So first I'm gonna create a div, and I'm gonna call this div or give it the ID of skills. So inside of this wrapper, we're gonna create a UL tag, and inside of this UL tag, I'm gonna paste in a couple LI tags. So I'm just gonna paste in some of the things that I wanna note or I wanna add on here. So go ahead and just add what you want or copy this for now. And I also want to add in another UL tag, and I'm gonna paste that twice and add in some other skills here. So let's go ahead and add that. And if I look at it, it's just gonna have them going, it's just gonna stack on top of each other. So we're just gonna have them listed out here. So what I wanna do is first set up our columns. So if you look at this, we do have 2 columns, but because we don't have that grid area set up properly, it's just overflowing to the right. So I'm gonna do something a little bit different and show you a trick to make grids responsive naturally without having to write media queries like we did here. So this is very useful when the layout is more complex, but if we're doing something like just lining it up like we're doing, it's gonna be a lot easier. This can be done with Flexbox or just make grids naturally responsive. So I'm gonna take this, this class right here. So we're gonna take the about wrapper, and that's gonna be a class. So we're gonna put that dot there. And the first thing is to display that as a grid. And then we wanna use grid template columns. So what we could do here is we could do something like 1FR, 1FR, and then create 2 grids. But what's gonna happen is just like before, once we crush that, it's gonna keep that sizing and then crush all the items in there. So what I'm gonna say here, I'm just gonna write in some code and then I'll explain what's going on. So we're gonna start with adding repeat. And inside of repeat, I'm gonna say auto-fit. And I'll get to this in a second and explain what's going on. So we're gonna have auto-fit, and then we're gonna put a comma in there, and then we're gonna do min max. And inside of min max, we're gonna set 320, and that's gonna be in pixels, and then 1 FR. So what we're saying here is repeat this action right here, which tells us auto fit as many columns as we can into this row. So however many columns will fit in there, go ahead and add them in there and repeat it this way. With min max, say that the column should never be smaller than 320 pixels. So once we get to the point where it starts crushing it, go ahead and start naturally stacking those items. Now, if we expand it, go ahead and just expand the column with it. So let's try this. And just to be able to see this, I'm gonna take this text right here and I'm gonna paste it into that social link section before we actually add text there. And let's just try this. So if I refresh that, so now we have our 2 columns. That's that dummy text I just added. And we have this left side right here. So if I start shrinking this right here, let me try to expand this. So as we're going, we're gonna reach 320 pixels, and then this one, just like a flow, is just gonna get crushed down to the right. So if you look at it, that column on the right just got pushed down, and it naturally just was responsive. That's a cool little trick. It's gonna make things a lot easier. Sometimes it's an overkill to start writing too much there, so it's just an easier way to go about things. Now, let's go to the next section, and what we wanna do now is just style our skills here. So I'm gonna take that ID, and I'm gonna go just underneath my about wrapper, and I'm gonna paste in skills here. So we're gonna display skills as flex, and this can also be, what am I doing here actually? Is it flex or, yeah, so we're just gonna do flex here for this instead of grid, just because it's a simple little alignment here. So we're gonna do justify content, and I'm gonna do space dash evenly. So we used space around earlier, and that just pushed all the content as far as possible away from both columns. But in this case, what we want to do is we want to make sure that there's space between, but we're not just stacking this one to the very left and this one to the very right. We just want to create a good amount of margin between them. So that's what flex is going to do for us and justify content. And now I just want to set the background color. And for this, I actually want to use a variable. So I'm going to repeat the color that we have up in that shadow that we created earlier, which I called preview shadow here. So if I take a look at this right now, it's just going to be this color right here. So I just want to make sure that that's consistent. And there we go. So things are looking pretty good. I want to add some padding to this row right here. So let's just do that. We'll add in padding top to the about wrapper. And we'll also do padding bottom. So padding bottom, I'm going to set that to 50 pixels. And padding top Let's set that to 50 pixels. So let's go into this social link section now, and let's add in this image with these links right here with that header. So the first thing I want to do is add in, or take this out, and then I'm going to add in that image. So we're going to do image, and I'm going to set that to images, and then we're going to do follow.jpg. So in my images folder, I added that image in probably about 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago. So it's already in there. And if I refresh it, it's going to overflow. So I want to set the width, make sure that it actually fits into the contents of that column. So I'm going to take the ID here. So I'm going to add an ID. This is going to be social_image. And I need to make sure to add a quote there so it's separated. And let's take this value and add a width to this. So I'm going to set this to 100%. And that should fix our first issue. So 100%. And let's check that out. Okay, so that looks better. In a minute here, I'm gonna add in some gaps right here. So I actually want to do this with CSS grids. So I wanna create that spacing, but before we do that, let's actually add in the rest. So I'm gonna take this section, I'm gonna copy that, and I'm gonna paste that just underneath here inside of an H3 tag. So I'm gonna create the H3 tag, put that section in, and for the social links, I'm actually gonna paste in some links here. These are gonna be the links to my actual Twitter and YouTube account. And it's just a link, and we're going to do target blank so it opens up in a new link here, and I'll replace the actual links later, so those aren't relevant to this video right now, but those will go in there. And if I refresh this section, there we go. So that looks a little bit better. I want to center this text and create that gap next, so let's go ahead and take care of that. So I'm going to take this class right here, social links, and I don't think I added it anywhere here, and that's going to go above social image here, and that's a class. So for this, the first thing I'm going to do is display it as a grid. So display grid, and I want to make sure to align these vertically here. So let's just do align content, and we're going to do center. So you probably won't notice it too much right now. So if we look at it, I just want to make sure that this is centered here, and it moved it down a little bit. So that looks good. And the next thing I want to do is text align center here. So I want to center all the text inside of it. So text dash align center. And I also want to create that gap. So the text is going to get centered here, but in order to create a gap right now, so if you look at it, there's no space here. If we do inspect element, you'll actually be able to see the grids, the actual grid borders here. So that dotted purple line you're seeing, if you look at it, there's no space here. So as long as I'm hovered over, we can see it. So in order to actually add that spacing, we're going to go to that about wrapper, and it's already displayed as a grid here. So to create a gap, we're just going to do gap, and I'm going to set that to 100 pixels. So now if I refresh that, we should see space there. There we go. And in between the elements, you're now going to see space, and it looks a lot better. So we have that spacing, and I think that's it for this section. So I want to make sure that it's responsive. So it's mobile friendly here, and the links should be good once I actually add in the real ones. So the next section we're going to go into is going to be this blog section. So I'm going to create these cards right here. So we're going to just create little boxes, and then we're also going to make these naturally responsive with the auto rows there that we created. So the auto fit rows, and then we'll finish up with the contact form. So let's go ahead and start with this portfolio section. So let's go back to our website right here, and I'm going to go back to the HTML section of that. So in here, I'm going to create a wrapper here. So we're going to create a div, and this is where all of those posts are going to be held. So we're going to call this post-wrapper. And above this section, without actually wrapping it in anything, I'm going to create a title here. So we're just going to put an H3 tag in there. And I want to style that by default. So I'm just going to style it inline because it's a simple style, and we're not going to really reuse this. So we're just going to do text align center. And I want to take this title right here and just paste that in. So some of my past projects. So however you want to call this, make sure you just add that. So we're going to have our title within our main container. Then we're going to have a wrapper to actually hold all of those posts. So every single post will be in its own div here. So that wrapper right there for the post itself is going to be called post, and we're just going to leave it at that. So it's just going to be post, and we're going to repeat this 3 times for now. And we want to add an image. So for the image by default, what I'm going to do is go into my images folder, and I'm going to throw in a picture of myself. So the one that we used earlier. And then I'm actually going to go in and replace these once we actually have this done. So let's go ahead and just do images /Denis.jpg. And just underneath that, we want to create a little section for the actual content. So we're going to throw in our image inside of this wrapper, and this is going to be called post intro. So this is going to be like that detail section or post detail. I don't remember what I call that. I'm actually going to call it post preview. So we're just going to throw that in here, and all of the text will be inside of this inner div right here. So let's add that class, and this is going to be post-preview. And now inside of this preview, so let's create some space here so we can actually see every single post. So that ends right here. Now inside of this preview, so we have the image above it, let's create an H6 tag, and this is going to be called post title. So I'm just going to give it that text for now, and I'll change this in a second. And we're going to give this the class of post-title. Now underneath this title, I want to create, I just want to add some paragraph tags here. So I'm going to add some text, and this is going to be, it's going to have the class of post intro, so post-intro. And we're just going to say this is a sentence, and I'm going to say some more text here. So that's just going to be some filler text, and we'll actually change this later. Some more text here. Okay, so that does it, and I want to make sure to fix that. And we also need a class for the thumbnail. So let's just do class, and we'll set that to thumbnail. And now what I can do is repeat this 2 more times. So everything looks good so far, and I'm just going to take this post right here, and within that post wrapper, paste it 2 more times. So we have all that content now. So now if I refresh it, we should see these posts lined up. So what I want to do is actually create the columns, fix up this image, and start creating this bottom section right here. So let's go back to the CSS now, and let's start working with this. So for the post wrapper, I'm going to take this and put that just underneath our social image, and I'm going to display this as a grid. So we'll do display grid, and for the grid template columns, I'm going to do what I did just above here, and in this case, instead of setting a min max, we're just going to do repeat, and I just want to make sure that this is auto fit. So fit as many as you can in there, but never let it go below or above 320 pixels. So just leave it at 320, and that should be the size of the individual columns. Now, I want to actually style this thumbnail. So for the thumbnail, we want to make sure that this is going to be 100% in width to the border. So whatever the actual content or the column size is. So this is going to be width 100%. And the height, we're just going to do 180 pixels. So for the height, 180. And I actually want to display this as block. So we want to have more control over it, and I'm just going to do display block. And this is going to fix a spacing issue that we're about to have. So if I go back to the page here, we should see it. Our image is distorted like that because of the size. So what I'm going to do is add in a gap, and we'll fix the image. So for the image, to fix that, all we need to do is we just need to do object fit, and this will be set to cover. So that fixes the image. Now for the actual spacing in between for the post wrapper, we're just going to set gap to 20 pixels. And we also want to center that. So we're going to do justify content. This will be center, and let's take a look at what we have so far. Okay, that looks good. That's centered. So now if I actually shrink the size here, it's just going to adjust and center all of those posts. So I want to add a border. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're also going to add a shadow. So for this is going to be for the actual post itself. So I'm going to put that above our thumbnail, and we're just going to do a border, and this is going to be 1 pixel solid, and we're just going to use that variable. So we're going to use the border color variable that we set earlier, and that's at the top of the page. And for the shadow, I'm just going to paste in what I've been using this whole time. So we'll paste that. And we also want a background for this preview. So for the preview, we're just going to put that underneath our thumbnail. And this is just that wrapper around all of the text. So we're just going to set the background color to white. So that's going to be the white hex of FFF. And we also want to set a padding of 15 pixels. So I want to create some space here. And let's see what we have so far. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. And I also want to take out this line height, make sure that's lined up properly here. And one thing we're going to do different here is we need to actually set the colors to these 2 sections, because when we change this, so when we change the theme, you notice that the text goes from dark to white, but in this section, we need it to stay. So our default code will actually change this, but if we set this down below here and actually customize that, it'll fix it. So let's actually set those values. So for this, we're going to take our post title and we'll put that just above or just underneath our post preview. And I'm going to set the color of the text to black. So that's going to be black with that title right here. So we put the class here. And for the post intro, I'm just going to paste in that hex. So I want to actually change the font size too. So for the color here, we're just going to use this hex. So paste that. And I want to actually set the font size and make that a little bit smaller. So I think we're at about 16 pixels. And in this section, I think it'll look better if it was smaller. So we're just going to do 16 px right there. And let's see what we have. So there we go. So that shrunk the text a little bit. Now let's actually remove some of the styling or the line height. So for this, I'm just going to set the margin to post title here. So for title, we're going to set margin to 0. And I think that should remove it because I think that's what's causing all of that spacing right there. So there we go. That fixes it. And what I want to do right now is add some padding, and then I'm going to quickly just replace this text and actually all of the images. So I'll just pause it really quick, take care of that, and then we'll be back in a second. So let's first add padding to that post wrapper. So I want to make sure we can see that CSS. So let's just do padding bottom, and that's going to be 50 pixels. And I actually want to change this font size to 14 pixels instead of 16. So now if I refresh that, that looks a little bit better. So I'm going to pause right now, replace that, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I'm back. I just unpaused the video and we just replaced the pictures here and the actual content inside. And I also added this link right here. So if you go back to the HTML, it's just a link that says read more. We don't link out to anything just yet. And I want to fix one little issue here. So you notice that when we have content here, so we have 3 lines for both of these, but we have 2 lines for this one, and we have this overflow section. So what's happening here is that our containers are actually set to that post. So if you look back at the HTML, we have our wrapper, and these are being made into our columns. So those are our containers, and when one changes in height, they always make sure that they're adjusting with it. So the quick fix to this is to create a div around it and make that div the container. So there's different ways we can probably do this, but I'm just going to do an easy fix here. And I'm just going to create this div, and I'm going to wrap it around all 3 columns. So I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to indent this right here. So once this is fixed, the actual post will be treated like its own element and not an actual column within our grid. So let's replace that value, indent this, and we need to do this one more time. So the div opens and closes, and let's create the last one, and need to fix that spelling error. So for the last section, I'm just going to paste in that closing div, fix that, and let's fix the indentation. So now if I save this and refresh it, so now the actual container, so the elements in here for that post are just going to be its own element inside of a grid area. So if I look at that, I'm going to try to actually find that whole section. So there we go. So the purple lines are around it, but the container is inside of it. So you can see where that overflow happened on the very right one. So let's go ahead and go on to the next section, or move on to the next section. And for this section, I'm just going to style this form. So we're going to create a form, fill out these form fields right here, and then we'll actually create the individual post and move on to the final section of actually switching that theme, and then we'll just get to hosting it. So let's go ahead and continue on right here. So for this next section, I want to go pretty quick here. I'm going to do a little bit of copying and pasting just to speed things up, because we are just working with a simple form, but I want to show you something that we need to do here. So let's create the form, and we're going to style the button first. So in here, to replace this contact section, we're just going to take this title right here, and actually it's the title for this section, so this H3 tag, and I'm just going to say get in touch here. So instead of my past projects, let's do get in touch, and let's take out that S. So for this section, we're just going to create a form. We're not going to have any wrapper around it, and we have our form tag. So we're going to create an ID. This is going to be contact-form. And the thing I want to write manually is going to be that submit button. So this needs to be customized per page. So we're going to change this to submit. And the value of this needs to be submit right here. So we're going to take out name, and or we'll just say send. So this is going to be the actual text on it. And I want to give this the ID of submit button. So we're going to set the ID. and we're just going to say submit-btn. And we need to create a custom variable for this. So we're going to create a variable. This is going to be called submit button. And actually, we'll change this to button color. So let's just do btn color. We'll camel case that. And the value of this is going to be black. So I want to make sure that I'm following the same styling here. So this is going to be called button color instead of btn color. So this is going to be black. And the reason why we put this in a variable is because when we switch the theme here, so if we go to purple, we need this color to adjust with it. Now, if we go to blue, that color always needs to change with it. So that's why we're going to start with black and then make that dynamic. So once we set this value, we can go down to the bottom of the page here. So the bottom of my CSS file, just above my media queries. And let's create some space here. So I'm just going to paste in the entire CSS for that button, and I'll explain what's going on. So just underneath our post intro, so we go and we start working with this ID right here. We create a margin top to create some spacing. We set that width to full width, the padding to 10 pixels to the top, the bottom 10 pixels, the color should be white, and then that background color with no border. So if I save that, and if we refresh it, so we have this button that's full width, and it takes up the entire screen. So once we actually set the form wrapper to it, it's going to adjust and it's going to look a little bit better. So let's start actually working with the form field. So for this, I'm just going to paste in the fields individually. So we're going to start with our label for the name, and the input field, we're going to start with the name. And we want to make sure that each field has a class of input field because that's how I'm going to style it. Now for the next one, we're going to use the subject here. So that's going to go just underneath. And again, the value or the name of that needs to be subject for when we submit that. We have the input field for the class there, and then our email. And the last one is going to be a text area. So this is going to be message. And for message, we're going to have the input field of text area, but we need to customize this and make sure that we have more space. So for this thing, for this area, we want to make sure that we have more height right here just for that text area where they actually write the message. So now if I refresh this, that's what our form fields look right now. So we want to start styling the form itself, and then we'll go to the input field. So just above where our button is, let's actually paste in the code for our contact form. So just above the submit button, we're going to display the form as block. We're going to set the max width to 600 pixels. So if we set it to max width, it means that when we shrink it, that this will actually be responsive. So we don't have to write a media query and change that when we're under 600 pixels. And then we're just going to center that. We're going to use our border variable right there. And we want some padding, border radius to make that round. And then the background color will be that main color. So that's going to be that light gray color. And we also want some margin. So if I refresh this section, that's what we're going to have so far. So that's all the styling. We just centered that form. And now let's actually go to the input fields. So for the input fields, I'm going to paste that just underneath contact form and between submit button. We want to make sure that each field is 100% in width. Then we want to make sure that we have a padding to the top. So we're expanding the size of the field, padding to the bottom, some border colors, radius, and the font size. So there's not much to it. We're just working with that class right there. And let's take a look there. So that looks pretty good. I just want to add in this section, make sure that's taller, and some line height. So I want to make sure this text is a little bit separate from the actual input fields. So just above my input field, I'm going to paste in the contact form, and we're going to work with that label tag. So we're creating some height there, and we want to make sure that the contact form text area has a min height of 100 pixels, and I set the font size there. So if I refresh it, that looks good. That's the form that we needed. So what I'm going to do now is actually move on to creating that individual page. So right now we're not linking to anywhere. It just gives me that pound symbol right there. And I'm going to keep this really simple. So instead of actually formatting where our pages and our CSS files go, I'm just going to create a new file right within our main folder here. And I'm just going to call this post.html. So we're going to create this new post, and I'm going to take out default CSS. And I'm going to paste in some HTML into post.html. So this is our boilerplate HTML. There's our viewport, our title right here. So it's all basic. There's our Google fonts. It's exactly what we have in our main page here. And we just link up that style sheet with our container. So we just have our main container. So this is going to center all of our content. And to actually link this up, this is what we're going to do. So we're going to go to this post page, or this post section, if I can find that. So our posts are right here. So in order to link this up, just can't seem to find that. Okay, so it's right here in main container. So we're just going to take this first post and we're going to send it to post.html. Now on this page, we're actually going to move that navigation bar. So I want to make sure that you can actually see how that works. So let's go ahead and start with our left one right here. And this is the only one that links up. So we're taken to that page, and this is where we can actually make this, this nav bar reusable right here. So we're not going to have this format on every page. So what I want to do here is just grab that navigation bar, and I'm going to close this out. Let's grab that nav bar, and that's going to be at the top of the page. And all I need to do is take everything from nav wrapper, and we can take this entire section, and because of our styling, because of how we have it set up, all I need to do is paste it into the top of my container right here. And I'm actually going to take that and put it in the top of the body right there instead of the main container. And the nav bar will automatically adjust to wherever it's supposed to be. So it's just going to increase in size. So if I refresh it and go back to this page, it should look a little bit better. So there we go. So we have our navigation bar, our posts. So whatever you want to put in here, go ahead and add that. But we can just link up to the home page, maybe from this section. If you want to do that, I'm going to leave that up to you. But now we have a nav bar that can adjust, and we can link out to that page. For this next section, I want to start by working with a little bit of JavaScript, and we want to start changing that theme. So what we're going to do is create 3 more CSS files, and I'm just going to use the variables for these. So all we're going to do is create 3 more files that are just going to have these variables. So the rest of the page for the layout, we're going to leave how it is, and I just need to change these contents. And in the top of my pages here, so within the home page, all I need to do is create a new link right here, and we are going to link up whatever style sheet that we want. So the first thing that we need to do for this section is put an ID on this style sheet, and we're just going to have to change the value of this href depending on which theme was clicked. So let's start by just changing this to theme-style. And what I'm going to do is quickly explain what's happening here. So right now we have this link right here, and we also have our style sheet above. So we have our default style sheet that's going to contain all of the styles for the page, for the layout, and we have all these variables up here. So in a sense, this style sheet's actually going to chain down. So it's going to set this styling first, but then if we apply another style sheet with different variables, because all these values are working off of those variables, we're going to overwrite these ones, and it's going to change these values, therefore changing the style sheet. So let me give you a quick example of what's happening. So let's create a new style sheet, and we're going to call this blue.css. And we put this ID on it because we're going to have to use JavaScript to find this file and actually change this value. So in blue.css, if I copy these variables and I change these, so I'm going to manually change these values without using JavaScript. So we're going to do blue.css. And now if I change these values, what's going to happen here is we're going to see the second style sheet apply for whatever items are in there. So we don't have the layout stuff here, so we're still going to take it from this style sheet, but these values will change. So let me actually take a color here. So for blue.css, we want this to be a dark navy blue, and I'm also going to paste in another hex color. So if I save this, again, we're going to work with this style sheet first, and then we're going to take the values from here and overwrite what's in here. So we're going to overwrite those variables, and let me just show you the page right now. So if I refresh this, now the background and the main colors have changed. So we still need to change more values, but we read that first style sheet that has the layout, and then we changed those values. So let's actually start replacing these and change the text. So if I go back to the demo site, let's actually set the text to white, and then the secondary text to that eggshell white or that darker white, and then we'll set the borders. So for this, and let's move this over. So for the border color, I'm just going to paste in another hex color. We're going to change that. And for the main text, we're going to make this white. So this is going to be FFF. And for the secondary text, it's just going to be a darker white. That's going to be that E value right there. So if I refresh it, we're looking a little bit better. So now we have the border, the text looks different, and we need to change this value here. So we need to change that to dark, and then we actually need to change the text in here. Or no, the text is fine, but we need to change that background color. So let's finish this up. There's not that many values to change. So the theme dot border, we're going to change this to white. So that's going to be the border around these items. So now if I change that, you can see that that's white, but in the original, they're supposed to be dark like that. So let's finish this up here. So I'm going to reset the next values, and then I'll explain a little bit more. So for the preview shadow, we're going to change the hex here, and we also want to change the RGBA value or RGB value. And that's just going to be 25, 39, 52, and then 0.8. And finally, for the button color, that's going to be light blue. So we're going to paste in that hex, and let's take a look at what's happening. So if I refresh that, now that looks like exactly what we need here. So all of our forms adjusted. That's why we needed those variables, because it makes that a lot easier. We don't have to go through and change all of those styles. We can just reset these variables. So if I wanted to use the default CSS, I could just change this or leave it because that styling is already applied. And if we go back to the page, if we refresh it, now we're back to that white theme. So let's actually change this to, or let's actually add a blue or a green and purple values here. So I'm going to create 2 more style sheets, and I'm going to set those. So I'll show you what that looks like, and then we'll actually start applying JavaScript and showing you how we can dynamically change that. So let's just do green.css. And for this, I'm just going to go ahead and start pasting in these values. So for green.css, I'm going to take everything from this section. We're going to paste it in here, and I'm actually going to look at my demo code. So for green, let's just take these values for our main color. Let's give me the hex. Then we have our secondary color, our border color, and our main text. We're going to leave that to white. So we're just going to use that value and then use this value for the secondary text. And for the theme dot, or the theme dot border, that's going to be white again. And for the preview shadow, that's going to be, let's see, let's paste that hex in. So we're going to change that value. And for the preview background, I want to change those values too. So preview background, let's paste that in. So let's just test this by moving this to our green CSS. So let's just do green.css now, and let's refresh. So now we're in the green, and that looks good so far. And I just realized the button color needs to be different. So for the button color, that's going to be this next hex color right here. So I need to put that in there. And let's actually copy this for purple now, because the main text and these borders are always going to be the same now for the dark modes, or for the darker modes. And the last one I want to do is purple. So let's just do new file, purple. And this is all in the source code. So if I'm going too fast, just go ahead and get the values from there. So purple.css, I'm going to paste this in. And for purple, we just need to change the main color. Then we have our secondary color. Our border color will be different. So main text, that's going to stay white. That's that lighter white. Theme dot, we're also going to leave that to white. And we need to change the preview shadow. So that's going to be different for purple. And for the preview background here, I just need to change that RGB value. So if I switch that, we need to change this to purple. And let's refresh that. So variables are really making our life a lot easier now. Okay, so we're now in purple mode, and I want to change this button color here. So for the button color, left that out here. Just want to make sure that that's actually right. So we'll replace that, and purple should be good now. So that should be that purple value. And now I like the look of the links here. I like that blue, but I do want to change this nav section right here. So let's quickly just fix that. Let's go back to our default, and I want to take the navigation section. So let's find that nav wrapper, and we're just going to take navigation, and we want to update the A tag right here. So we just want to edit that, and we're just going to say for the navigation, make sure that the color of this is going to be the main theme color. So color is going to be set to that variable. So whatever that variable is, and we're just going to do main, and we're going to do text. So now if I refresh this, we should see a light color here. Now, if I go to that white mode here, this color will be black because that's the set color for that. But something I wanted to show you here is whenever we go to another page, I'm not going to adjust these colors here because because we don't have that second style sheet in here, so if we go to post.html, I'm not going to include that. So if you want to change the theme across the entire website, I'll leave that up to you, but I'm not going to include that. So because we have that variable set, it'll be dark right here, and it'll always stay in white mode within a blog or other pages, but within the home page, this is where we want to set the theme. So let's move on to the next section. And what we want to do now is add some JavaScript so we can grab this item by its ID and then change this href property right here. So I want to take this out and leave that blank until we actually load the page. And I need to create a script.js file. So we can call it whatever we want, but I'm just going to keep it script.js, and I'm going to put that in the same directory as all my other files. So script.js, and now I want to link it up. So at the bottom of the page, just above my closing body tag, we're just going to add this in. And for the source, I'm going to set that to the new file we just created, and now we have it linked up. So let's close out some of these files. I'm going to close out default.css in purple and put script.js on the right. So now that it's linked up, I just want to make sure that it's working. So let's try doing console.log and say it's working, and let's see how that looks. So if I refresh it, so this should go back to white mode here. Now if I inspect element, we should see it console out here. There we go. So we know our JavaScript's working. And what we want to do now is add an event handler to all of these before we actually start changing that. So as we click on these, I want to go and grab these by the class of theme dot. So let's find that here. So we're going to get it by this class right here. So they all have the class of theme dot, and we want to first query those items and then create a loop to actually add an event handler. So we're just going to do theme dots, and I'm going to do a capital D there, and let's just do document.get elements by class name, and we need to throw in that value. So we need to tell this what that value is. So we're going to get them by the class name of theme dot, and let's start creating that loop. So we want to iterate over all those theme dots and add the event handler. So let's just start doing this, and we're going to go var I, that's set to 0. Then we need to grab the theme dots dot length, and while that's greater than I, we want to increment I. So let's add that value. And that looks good so far, I think. So now on each iteration, we want to actually get the item in there. So we're going to index it like that. And let's go ahead and add that event listener. So dot add event listener. And the event we want to listen for is going to be a click. And we just want to trigger this function. So let's trigger that function, make sure that it's working. And let's just console.log and say option clicked. So on each click, we should see this in the console, and I actually want to console out an item here. So what I'm going to do, let's actually make sure this is working first. So let's open up that console, let's refresh it. And looks like we have a small issue here. Let's see what's going on. Add event listener is not a function. And looks like I have to capitalize that E right there. So E needs to be capitalized, and now that should work. So we iterate on each loop here. And now when we click on these, we know that something's happening. So I want to know what theme option was clicked. So to do this, I'm going to add in a custom attribute to my HTML. So within here, on each theme dot, I'm going to create a custom attribute, and we can do that by setting the value of data and then whatever we want to call it. So we're going to call that mode, and the first one's going to be light. And then I'm just going to repeat this and change these values. So this way we know exactly what button was clicked and how to actually change this value. So I'm going to change all of these, this to blue, then purple and green, or green and purple. Last one is going to be purple. Okay, so now that we set this custom attribute, I want to actually query this out. So in order to actually get that mode, let's just create a variable here, and we'll just say mode. And the variable will be this dot data set dot mode. So we're going to take that attribute of mode, and we're going to console that out. And then I want to actually throw that in here. So I want to be able to see it, and let's try that. So let's test that one more time. This is not working. Let's see what's going on here. And it looks like I need to add the equal sign there. Now if I refresh that, as we click on it, so we know light mode was clicked, purple, green, blue, and everything's checking out. So let's actually start changing the theme on each click here. So down below, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call this function set theme. So we're going to trigger this function on each loop, and we're just going to say, actually, let's give it a name. So let's say set theme, and I'm going to capitalize the second T, and I want to trigger this function on each loop here. So to the function, we want to pass in the mode, and we need to utilize that attribute right here, or that parameter. So we're going to pass it in, and I need to create a conditional here. So I'm going to say if the mode is equal to, let's say light, so it's going to be a string. Let's finish this up here. If the mode is light, let's go ahead and grab this value right here. So we're going to take document.getElement by ID, and we'll do theme style. And I'm actually just going to grab some code here that I have pre-written, and I'll just recap it. So we're going to do document.getElement by ID, and we're going to take that by theme style. So we're going to grab that CSS file, and we're going to set that to default.css. Now, if the mode is going to be blue, we'll just change that value. So we're just going to say blue, and this is going to be blue.css, and we just need to repeat this a few more times. So we're going to do that for purple, or green and purple. So we'll just keep changing the values, and I think you'll be able to understand what's starting to happen here, and I'll recap it if not in a second here. So this is purple. So whatever mode is passed in, whatever button we click on, we just change that CSS value. So we grab this link right here, and we change that href. So we're just setting that by doing themestyle.href, and we set it. So let's test it now, and now on each click, it should change the value. So if I click blue, now it's blue here, purple, and green. So we need to do a few more things. On that transition, I want to make sure that that's smoother right here. So it switches pretty fast. I want to give it a smoother effect. So if you try the demo here, it kind of looks like the lights are switching out. And I also want to make sure that it saves. So right now, whenever we refresh this, it doesn't actually save. So I want to save these values. So if we set to purple and refresh it, it just goes back each time. So to actually save, or to make that transition, all I'm going to do is go back to my CSS file. And within my CSS file, I'm just going to grab the body tag, and I'm just going to say star. So that means all the elements, all the child elements, let's set transition to 0.3 seconds. So it's going to delay it for a second, and it's going to look a little bit better. So now when we switch that, it looks, I don't know if you noticed that, but once you try it on your own screen, it should look a little bit different. It looks just a little bit nicer and gives it a better effect. So right now, what I want to do is actually save that value in my local storage. So if you don't understand local storage, let's go to the console here. It's a way to actually save information in the browser. We can use cookies for this. That might be a term you're more familiar with, and we can actually do this that way. But for now, I'm just going to use local storage, and that's going to be within application and right here. So it's just going to be the value that's saved with a theme, and I can delete that because that was from the other website. So to get this value, let's first see what we have in local storage and then actually set that. So back in my script.js file, and I'm going to move this to this side here. In script.js, the first thing we want to do is grab the theme that's in there. So let's just say let, and then we're going to set the value of theme. And to actually find a value in local storage, all we need to do is local, and then storage is with a capital S. So we're going to say local storage dot get item, and we want to get the value of theme. So right now, because there is no item in there called theme, it's just a key value pair. It's going to look for a key called theme, and if it doesn't have one, it's just going to return it to null. So it's not going to have anything there. So we're just going to write a conditional, and we're going to say if the theme is equal to null, let's go ahead and actually set this the theme here. So we'll take this function, and we want to trigger that. And at this point, I just want to manually pass in a theme. So if somebody's on our page for the first time, let's have them see the white theme here. So if we do have a theme here, so if local storage does have a theme, let's go ahead and trigger that, and we'll just say set theme, and we'll take that value and pass it in. So we'll take whatever was in local storage, and we'll pass that in right here. So that's how we're able to set the value. This isn't going to do anything right now, because if we console out local storage, we would see that there is nothing in here. So in order to actually set that value, we're going to set it in the set theme function. So at the bottom here, this is how we get a value from local storage, but to actually set one, we're just going to use local storage, and instead of get item, we're going to do set item here. So just want to make sure that's correct. So that's going to be set item, and we're going to set the value of theme and that's going to be the key. So whatever you want to give it the name, or whatever name you want to give it, and we're going to set that value to mode. So now when we load our page, it's going to say null, and then it's going to trigger the set theme function, which is going to pass in light. And then right here, we're going to set that in local storage. So let's try that. And now that local storage value was set. So it's in light mode at first because we didn't have one there. And if I switch this to blue, it changes this value right here. So it finds the key and then it changes the value, and that will stay with us. Now, if a user refreshes this, that's going to stay with them, and it's going to be there until they clear that value. So what's happening here is on the first load, we're setting that theme to light. And once we have it, it finds it, grabs that value, throws it into this function, and then we're setting this value. So now it's time to host our website. We are going to use AWS S3 buckets. So in order to do this, you do need an AWS account, and unfortunately we do need a card. So I know there's going to be a few people that don't have this, but we do need a card on file. So if you have one, go ahead and do a search for AWS, and you should be able to pull this link up. So aws.amazon.com, and create the account. I already have one, so we're going to go to our management console, and in here, go ahead and do a search for S3. So it's already in my commonly searched areas. And I created a new account just to be able to start fresh, and I am going to take down this link. So the bucket that we have here, I am going to provide a demo in the description, but it's not going to be this one. So don't follow this URL. Now, when we're creating a bucket, we do need to give it a unique name. So go ahead and give it a name. You might need to try this a few times. And I'm just going to do Denis demo. Let's see if that's available. And for the region, I'm just going to leave it to whatever I have. So let's go ahead and hit next here. And we're just going to leave all the standard settings. But in this section, I am going to turn off block all public access. So in order to actually display files, you do need to make them open. You do need to make them available to the public. So go ahead and change that value. And let's go ahead and create bucket. So we have our bucket. And the first thing we need to do here, so I'm going to show you a few things. So the first thing we need to do is we need to grab that bucket and actually drag in the files into it. So let's go ahead and just minimize this, close out some of these things right here, and let's close out the website or minimize that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in this file that you're going to have in the source code. So I'm going to leave that there for you. And we are going to take all of these files in that website, and we want to just drag them into the bucket. So let's take this, and we're just going to go to upload. And now within upload, I'm just going to drag in all the files. And let's go back here. Let's hit next. And right now, I'm going to do not grant public access. So I'm going to leave it like this for now. So what's happening here is we set our bucket to actually allow public access, but we don't allow the individual items to actually be viewed by the public. And I'll show you how to fix that and some ways to go about that. So I just wanted to go through that manual process. So they're just uploading. We'll give that a second. Okay, so all the items are uploaded in the bucket. Now, if I go to my index.html file, if I click on this link, I'm going to be blocked right here. So because it's not public, it has this, it just stops me from loading it. And what I need to do to that is, because the bucket was set to public, we allowed those permissions, we need to actually go to this individual item right here and make that public. Now if I open it, I can go to open that in a new tab. We're going to be able to see that file, but because that CSS file is not public, we would have to go back to that CSS file and also make that public. So I'm actually going to make this a little bit easier, but I want to show you this process. So we're going to go to default.css, make public. And now if I refresh it, we're going to see it on this link, but the images also are not public. So the quick workaround here is you could go through all the items here and make them public, but we are going to just set a bucket policy permission. So, or we're going to write a bucket policy here. And this is going to allow us to overwrite all the items in that bucket and just allow every item in it to be public. So we're okay with that. And to do that, we're going to go back to our code here. And this right here, what I just pasted in, so that was that text file I put in. We're going to copy this. It's going to be in your source code. So go ahead and paste that into the bucket policy. Now, we need to change this to our bucket name. So in this section, our bucket was called Denis-demo. We're going to take that and we can just replace that. So once we save it, it's going to allow all the items in our bucket to be public. So now if I go back to Amazon S3, it says all of those items are public. Now I don't have to manually go and change all of these items. So if I refresh this, now we should see our images and we are publicly hosting this. Now, the next thing I want to do, because this is just a static file up on a bucket right now, it just has our link right here and then index.html. We actually want to perform static file hosting. So to do that, we're going to go to properties and we're going to select static file hosting. Now, we're going to say use this bucket to host a website. And I just need to set the file that I want to load up by default. So by default, I want my index.html file. We can create a page for our air page there. We're going to save that. And if I go back to this, now we're going to get this link right here, and it's not going to have that /index.html right there. It's just going to be the bucket name. So this is now a public link. I'm actually going to take this down. I'll provide a real one in the video description, but our website is now hosted publicly. We can send this to anybody. You can look at it from your phone, and it's now a publicly available website. So to connect the domain, I'm going to leave that up to you guys, but all you need to do is point it to this URL from wherever you're hosting that, and that's it to actually host it publicly. Okay, so that's it for our portfolio website. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You can take a lot away from this. And if you like this kind of content, I do a lot of my own stuff on my channel, so definitely check that out. And Brad, thank you so much for this opportunity. This was a really cool idea, and I hope we can do it again. So I'll see you guys in another video.